Hiya, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me. Today we are going back to basics and we are going to do some very simple stenciling and masking in card making. So I am starting off with a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base, and I also have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card front. I'm going to be using some Masking Magic, which is just some masking paper. The Gina K one here is one of my favorites. It has the perfect amount of tack, and I like that I can add lots and lots of ink over it, and I know that it won't bleed through. So it is one of my favorites that I love using. Then I'm just going to trim a couple of different sized pieces of the masking paper that I will use on my card. So I have a piece of scrap paper there behind my card, but just so that you can see a little bit clearer, I'll take it off and I'm going to line up this main thick piece of masking paper, and that's where my sentiment will go in a little bit. And then just for decorative detail, I'm going to add these two really thin pieces of masking paper straight underneath the wider one there. Now, of course, you could just use some copy paper and some removable adhesive on the back of it. I often do that as well. So just use whatever you have available, even some post-it notes or something like that would work perfect as well. I'll tuck the little excess bits around the back there so that I know it'll stay nice and in place. And today I'm going to be trying out some of these Simon Hurley Create inks. Now, my neighbor gave me some of these to try. And if you guys have been watching my channel, you'll know that I use quite a lot of Distress Oxide inks. I have a few of those, and the other ones I have are the VersaFine Clear, which is a pigment ink, which is really good for stamping and fine detail. And of course the oxides are more of a hybrid, a mix in between a dye and a pigment ink. So I have a few little Catherine Paula dye inks, but I'm really thinking about investing in these Simon Hurley ones. I was very keen to try them out and see how they blended together for myself. Today I'm going to be using the Rosy Cheeks, Over the Moon and Traffic Cone colours. And I'm also going to be using the scrapbook.com domed blending foams. Now, if you are someone who has trouble with blending, I have definitely found that these have helped me a lot with getting a smooth, nice blend. Now, blending inks can be one of the most frustrating experiences for card makers. It is not easy to get a good blend. However, the right inks, the right paper, and the right tools definitely help. So here, often you need to start off the paper and get rid of that really kind of harsh bit of ink before you start blending onto your card panel. However, with these inks in particular, I'm really surprised at how they are blending. I did not really have high hopes, and I honestly didn't really know a lot about these inks. I hadn't used them before, and I wasn't really on the lookout to invest in a new set of ink pads. However, I am always keen to try out new things and give things a go and kind of give a bit of a review on what I think of them. So this is me. This is the first time I tried them out. This is the first project that I made with these inks, and I am just blending. As I said, I started kind of off the page and then realized that they blend really well together. Now this is all in real time, this little bit of blending, so you can see that I'm kind of taking my time and having a play with them. I am going to speed it up from here though, just so that we can get through it a little bit faster, but it was really fun to just kind of have a nice play with these inks, and I was genuinely surprised with them. I did quite a bit of stamping, I did quite a lot of blending, I did some of the water reactive techniques, and I think this is something that I'm going to invest in. So it is really good to be able to weigh up all of those different things and what works for you, and different inks work for different people. So this is just my experience of using the Simon Hurley Create inks. Now, obviously, you can use any inks that you have in your stash. You can use anything that you use to blend. You could even use watercolors here, or you could use gelatos, or you could use mica powders. You could use anything that you have in your stash to create a background. It certainly doesn't have to be these inks, but I am just sharing my experience with you in case you are interested. I am going to go back over some of these colors. I was able to get a really light, beautiful, smooth blend Often, if you're having trouble blending, adding lots of ink and making the paper really saturated is a good way to get a blend as well. So it was nice to know that I'm able to get a really soft blend with these inks without too much trouble at all. So I'm just going back over some of them to get a little bit of a darker impression because I am going to stencil over top of this. Now, as I said, this technique is very easy and simple. I'm just masking off some white space, which is where my sentiment will end up going. And masking off some space is a really good technique to fall back on as one of those basics. And often I kind of forget to go back and do all of those really simple things. So this is a good one to remember. Now you could definitely leave it as is and just remove that masking paper and you would have this gorgeous design. However, to step it up a little bit more, I'm going to use this stencil here. This is just a rose with some foliage and decorations around the outside. And then I'm going to use some Hero Arts Pigment ink. This is the Unicorn White Pigment ink. Now I'm going to again just use a foam blender to blend on this ink, and I almost am going a little bit more kind of dabbing up and down for this ink just because I don't want it to seep underneath the stencil. So a little bit more of a dabbing action rather than the blending action that I did with the coloured inks earlier on. Now, the white pigment ink is a really good one to have in your stash. There are so many techniques that you can do with it. However, if you don't have it, then you could also use black. That would work just as well. Or you could use kind of a dark grey or even just another darker shade of the colours that we already used in the background would look really good as well. I am just going to shift the stencil around and make sure that I've got pattern covering quite a lot of the background. And at this stage, my masking paper is getting fairly saturated with ink, and that's one good thing I love about the ThermaWeb or Gina Designs masking magic paper is that I know it can take a lot of ink on top of it, and I won't get bleeding through and things, which is really important because when you work really hard on a project, the worst thing when you kind of pull up that masking and you want those nice crisp lines is to see that ink has bled through underneath your masking. So that can be really frustrating. So I'm just finishing off with a couple of extra little pieces of the white ink here and there. And then this is the fun part where I get to take off the masking paper and we kind of reveal our really cool design. So it looks pretty good as is, but I definitely need to let this dry because pigment ink stays wet for a little while. So it is important not to smudge it or anything. You can either heat set it or just give it some time. And then I'm pulling off this gorgeous masking and I love how that looks already. Now I saw that there were a couple of places that weren't quite properly dry, so I'm just going to take my heat tool and make sure that that white pigment ink is set really nicely. And then, as I said, the space that we masked off is going to be where my sentiment is going to go. Now, don't get me wrong, after all of this hard work, I am going to put my piece of work into my MISTI stamping tool. This is the mini MISTI, but you can definitely do this with an acrylic block, no problem at all. I'm going to use this Made For You stamp set, which is one of my absolute favorites at the moment. I love the size of the sentiments. And then to do the sentiment, I'm going to use the colour Woof, which is just a light-ish grey colour from the same Simon Hurley Creates collection. Now, it was a little bit too light for my liking, so I'm just going to stamp over a couple more times and that will make it nice and dark. Again, if you had done your stenciling in perhaps a black ink, then I would have done my sentiment in black as well, just so everything is coordinating. Now, as I said, this started off being a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card front as well, and I had forgotten up until this point that I wanted to cut off a little bit off each side. So I can still make that happen, and the pattern is still really clear from the stencil and things, so it worked out okay in the end. But I was definitely meant to do this at the beginning before I started all of my stenciling and things, but it worked out just fine. So as I said, I'm going to pop it onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card base, and that will leave a really nice little border right around the outside. I'm using some liquid glue, some Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish. And I fill these little glue bottles myself. I have a video on how to do that on my channel, the nice and clean and not too messy way. And that is my card finish for today. Very, very simple, back to basics card making, a really flat one-layered card. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. All of the supplies that I can find will be listed in the description box below. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks, bye!